Hi, my name is Dutton, and I'm from Georgetown University. I'm here today to talk with you about suicide and how we understand it psychologically. In general, psychological mechanisms, that is, how people think, decide, and act, include collective memories of historical events, both positive and traumatic. My goal is to help you better design your research projects by helping you know more about suicide and how it is defined both in research and clinically. It's important to know how the research field understands suicide or any other topic area in order to know better how to improve upon it. So, how do we define suicide? Well, of course, the ultimate definition is someone's actual death. But in order to study suicide and to treat suicidality, we need to look at several steps before an actual suicide. So, what are these? Most suicide risk assessments measure several levels or categories, including in the data set which you will be eventually working with. These can be thought of as having a suicide ideation, that is, thinking about suicide, forming a suicide plan, or making a suicide attempt, an actual attempt. Definitions of suicidality often begin with assessing the thoughts or feelings that life is simply not worth living, or I'd be better off dead. This is often because the person is experiencing so much emotional pain that they think suicide is the only way out of that pain. They may not have an actual desire to kill themselves. At that point, suicide is the only solution a person can imagine to the problem of emotional pain. The next level of seriousness are thoughts about actually wishing one was dead before there has been a plan or an attempt to accompany those thoughts. The more serious next step is when someone has developed an actual plan, thinking, how would I go about killing myself? And then developing the actual steps to do that. In some cases, the person doesn't yet have a way to carry out the plan, but for another person, they do. So it is also important to determine whether the person has the means to carry out the plan, or how difficult it would be to get those means to do so. The most serious level before completed suicide is when somebody has made an actual attempt to kill themselves. Some attempts may be less serious than others, but any attempt is serious. Having actually made a previous suicide attempt is a serious risk factor for a future attempt. Another important concept in understanding suicide prevention is lethality. Lethality is the level of likelihood of a suicide plan or a suicide attempt actually leading to death. Some suicide attempts are clearly more lethal than others. Of course, when working with people clinically, any suicide plan or suicide attempt should be taken very seriously. Clinically, if someone is talking about suicide and they become calm after a period of having been upset or distressed, it is important to determine whether this may actually indicate the person has made a decision to kill themselves and is feeling the relief that they believe will follow if they do that. This is much more difficult to determine in a research setting since this depends so much more on context and timing. A final point. It is important to distinguish between suicide and self-harm, for example, cutting. That is not intended to kill oneself. Thoughts, plans, and attempts when it comes to harming oneself, self-harm, without the desire to kill oneself and suicidality are two separate phenomena, although they may occur in the same person. Self-harm can lead to serious harm and injury, but often does not lead to suicide or to suicide attempts. Or if it does, it may progress over time. However, even when a person is not actively suicidal, acts of self-harm can unintentionally lead to death. And a recent study shows that repeated self-harm can be associated with increased risk of suicide attempts and death from suicide. When someone is engaging in self-harm, it is simply important to explicitly assess the risk for suicidality. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you for your attention.